Hello everybody, happy Halloween. On today's acrylic painting tutorial we're going to paint this spooky pumpkin painting. This painting took me about 3 hours to paint, but I'm going to condense it down into 20 minutes to show you how to paint a pumpkin, how to make a blurry background, how to use highlights and shadows to make it look 3D so you can paint this really hyper realistic acrylic painting. So I prepped my canvas and I drew a pumpkin and a street. For the sky I use light blue, white and grey to create a sort of moody, spooky grey sky. I used white towards the houses to blend it to make it look like it was getting lighter on the horizon. For the roof I blocked it in with blue and some of that sky colour, using things like ultramarine blue and browns because I wanted to create a spooky effect. So what I tried to do was I drew a rough street. I kind of painted all my shadows on first, things like where all the shades going to be, like trees and the roof and the windows, and all I did was I roughly blocked it in, and I used things like greys and blues for things like the pavement and the street curbs. I went round it with some of the sky colour, which I didn't really mind if it mixed up. I swapped to a smaller brush and I painted in things like faraway trees just to give the hint of depth. What I wanted to do with the painting was make my street look blurry and far into the background. So what I did at the beginning as I painted in this tree with a liner brush was I just blocked everything in to kind of figure out where I would like all the actual bits of my composition to be. So I was putting things in like trees, and when I was happy with it and I dried it, then I started to work on the blurry background. So to get the blurry background effect, all I did firstly was I went round everything and softened everything. I'm terrible at painting straight lines, so what I did, I used a flat-headed brush because I find the sharp edge is really good for sort of painting angles and sharp lines if you struggle at that at home. You can even use a ruler or tape. Now to get the blurry effect, I mixed some of the roof colour and some of the sky colour together to create a sort of mixture between the two, and I just outlined my roof. And I did the same with things like my windows, so I kind of created this blurry outline. And what I did was, once my painting was dry, I just softened all the sharp edges, things like the roof edges, things like the window ledges, and I just really softened them with a dry brush and this bit of sky colour. And then once I knew where I wanted everything to be, I can kind of start putting in sort of like the highlighted areas. So I used warm colours such as orange. You can mix a bit of orange and brown to create burnt sienna. And I would have different shades of that to just sort of have like light cascading from where I want things to be. And then I can go back and mix a bit of the sky colour, which was cerulean blue, ultramarine blue, white, to create sort of a blue colour. And then you can block in things like your grass and your bushes, and things like my tree. I used a liner brush, which is a really thin brush because it's so much easier to paint branches, but I don't want it really close to the viewer because I want to push it back into the background. I want my pumpkin to be the center point, so I want my background to be nice and blurry. So when I was happy and I've blocked all my grass and everything in, I've got some sort of orange just to soften it up. I'm using kind of the sky colour for the road. And then I added a little bit of purple just to cool it down to my sky colour. I wiped away 90% of the paint off a dry, soft blender brush. And then all I did was go over my tree to soften it and to make it look blurry and out of focus. So deliberately going over the top once it's dry, look, watch, and just making it softer. You're literally just colouring it in, but what it does is it makes it look softer and further back to create that sort of blurry effect. So you can do this on all your trees in the background, you can do it on your sharp edges of things like your roof. And what it does is, once you've got the painting blocked in, it just softens it and makes it look out of focus. So when we put in our things like our pumpkin, it will make the focus look more realistic. So on areas, as I say, I was using oranges to create the light. Things like the lamppost, just like the tree, I would use tape to get a straight line. And then I would remove the tape. If I got scruffy marks, it's no problem with acrylics, you can just paint over it. But again, just like the tree, I would paint everything in, I would refine sort of the background and make it look sort of blurry deliberately. And then I would soften what I'd painted in. So things like the lamppost, I would deliberately go over them with some grey just to soften them. And then for the blurry background with the light, I would just get some orange and yellow. And I would just mix different shades of that. So more yellow for brighter light, more orange for cooler light. And again, I would just create sort of rough shapes of where I'd want everything to be. But just before I committed and started to do the circles, like I was just starting to build them up, I realized my house and my sky, because I want this to be spooky and more Halloweeny and creepy, they were all a bit too light. So what I did was add some more grey to a blender brush, and I darkened things like my corners in my sky. I added some shadows on my left side of my houses just to make it look more in the shade. Just by adding things like blues and purples, you can cool things down. I can add things like shadows around the bushes to make it look more creepy. And then now that I'm happy with it, I could dry my canvas. I could get these shades of white and yellow and create circles basically to make it look like a blurry background. And these are things like lights, things like pumpkin lights, jack-o'-lanterns, even things like the street light. By making them smooth and creating different shades of orange and yellow, what you can do is make it look like it's out of focus. So the thing with acrylics, when you add paint, it looks really vibrant and lovely. Look, I'm making these lovely circles, but unfortunately, because we've got paint underneath it, it will dry and it will absorb some of the darker colours like the blues and the greens underneath. So a good rule of thumb is to do your circles, dry your work with a hairdryer, and then go over the top of them to get them more vibrant. So these could be little pumpkins and jack-o'-lanterns. I can get things like white and yellow look to add really bright highlights in areas. But just having different shades really adds to that blurry effect and pushes the background back. Things like my tree, as I say, look, I can mix some grey and white. I can push it back. So I'm just refining it now. I'm going over things twice to make it look more vibrant and pop. So a lot of making your work look realistic is just going over things once or twice and taking your time. So things like, look, my edges of my lamppost, I want them soft. I'm adding things like white to my yellow to make it look lovely. So now for the pumpkin, what I did was I mixed orange, blue and red. So orange, ultramarine blue and red. I added a tiny bit of burnt umber, and I blocked the whole pumpkin in with this sort of medium colour. Now the reason I chose this colour is because on the highlights it's going to be more yellow and orange, and on the shadows it's going to be more blue and purpley and cool. So on one side it's going to get lots of shade, so I can add things like ultramarine blue to my orange. Look, I can add purple, and that will cool it down and turn it more grey. Look, still got plenty of orange, but on this side, so on the bottom of my pumpkin and on the right hand side, it's not going to get much light because it's sort of back to the street light. So all I'm doing is using that colour, and I'm sort of using the medium tone sort of in the middle. I'm painting in things like his teeth, things like the grooves in the pumpkin. So I'm just trying to sort of figure it out, sort of create sort of texture on the pumpkin. And then on the opposite side, I'm using things like white, orange to create sort of more of a pastel tone, a bit of brown. And again, I can do the same thing. This is sort of the areas that are getting the light. So think of things like the Three Little Bears or Yin and Yang. It's really, really easy to think where you would have hot on one side, you would have cool on the other side. So by creating that sort of medium colour in the middle, we can add highlights really easily to the left hand side, and we can add shadows really easily to the right hand side and sort of mix it in between. So I've got some purple, grey and red So purple, grey and red. And I painted things like the bricks on my sort of porchway. We're going to have the pumpkin sort of sitting outside someone's home. So I've kind of got this lovely sort of colour. And again, it's kind of dark, moody to sort of imply. And then I can get sort of blues again and purples and add it to this grey to have the area that is in the shade. So where you've got the sort of bricks that aren't getting much light, look underneath. So if you just think a good rule of thumb, if you want to make things warmer, add hotter colours such as yellows, oranges, pinks and reds. And if you want to make things cooler to look like they're in the shade, look, this area could be sort of the shade where the pumpkin's light sort of cascading. We can add some bricks. You can add things like purples, browns, greys and blues. So this outer edge and sort of the detail of the pumpkin. If I make a mistake, I can dry my painting and I could use a baby wipe. So what I tend to do when painting in acrylics is I always dry my work every kind of like 10 minutes, and then it's kind of like if you ever play a computer game and you can have save points. Look, if I don't like an area, I can just go back and get a baby wipe and completely just delete it. I can kind of just rub it out. So dry your painting often. It kind of acts as an insurance. And then when we put things in like the pumpkin sort of little stem here, as I say, if you do things wrong first time, you can always correct it. Now this is a trick. My painting is totally dry. I've got a dry brush. I'm going to get some orange and wipe basically all the paint off apart from a little bit. And because my brush is totally dry and totally soft, I can kind of colour in my pumpkin. So this is a technique called glazing that we do often in the step-by-step acrylic painting tutorials here on the channel. So what I'm doing is I'm just glazing a hum of light. So if the street light is above, all my pumpkin I want more orange, so I'm just kind of colouring it in. And then excuse my lips in the video, I was singing along to some songs, and when I speed this up on 20 times the footage, I look like a horse chewing hay which is hilarious. But yes, I'm just sort of going round the edges where the light is sort of glowing. I can then fill in my sort of carvings, so I'm using yellow and orange to create sort of cad yellow deep hue, which is a golden colour. And then I can add more orange and create the sort of inside carving that's sort of getting the light to create a glow effect. Once I'm happy with that, look, I can create the shapes. I can get yellow and orange at the top where the light is cascading down, start to work on some of the texture. We have sort of the grooves in the pumpkin. As I go down, I'm just adding more orange. So I go from yellow and orange at the top to more orange and just sort of again glaze that left hand side, which is more in the light. So I'm just using a clean brush and some orange paint. I'm just trying to work it out how the light would be sort of cascading down onto the pumpkin. And then the really good thing is once you kind of know where it's going to be, look, you can create a glow from the candle inside the pumpkin sort of coming out. So let's draw that in. Let's have some yellow. So let's put some white in to create a candle. And then I can get some yellow and white. Sort of put some grooves in just in these eyes and things. Start refining everything with a fine brush. So just like painting the trees, it's so much easier to use sharp brushes for things like highlights. And as I say, with acrylics, sometimes you have to go over them a few times. So look, you can see me going over it, over and over it. That is the way it is. Unlike oils are really, really good, but they take forever to dry. So acrylics are much more convenient and they're much more forgiving. So look, all I'm doing is going around my edges. I'm just refining everything with this sharp brush. I'm just drying my work, going around things. If I've got any bits of white canvas sticking out, I'm just going around it. I'm making everything look nice and sharp, look more realistic, just making my glow softer. And then look, I can add really sharp highlights. I can add really sharp shadows, things like the bricks on the wall. So what we're trying to do is by using our darkest darks in the foreground and using this sort of orange to create a hum, to create the glow from the pumpkin and the light. What we're trying to do is by having these sharp edges is try to make the pumpkin and the bricks here in the foreground look in focus, and by having soft edges and hardly any sort of dark colors in the background, we're pushing it back. So what it should do when you stand away from this painting is make it look like the pumpkin and everything is in focus and the background is out of focus, and give that sort of cinematic effect that you get on things like your phone. So as I say, the reason I didn't do a tutorial is because I keep going back and forth with the painting. Sometimes it's not just A, B, C, D, like linear when you're teaching something in a tutorial. So it's easier to show you this as a time lapse, because you can see here, look, I'm reworking areas, I'm going over my highlights again and again. So to sit there for 2 hours to watch that would be a bit much. So as I say, it's the same trick over again. The left hand side, I'm putting more orange and yellow. I'm trying to just create more shade on the right hand side. And then just to finish it off, I'm just adding the last bit of highlights. I've got a really sharp brush just for the edges. I've got a textured blender brush for the bottom, and I'm putting some glow around the street light. So here's the painting. It's all finished. So I hope you all have a lovely Halloween. I hope you get lots of sweets and candy and you all go trick-or-treating. And don't forget to tag me with your versions of the tutorial. And I hope you've enjoyed it. Don't forget to like and subscribe and share it with fellow artists. And happy Halloween, everyone. Take care. Happy painting. Bye.